were last time. Let's see.
Necessary one. Yeah, we got to this. So I want to mention about the word science in
Yeah.
German. So Nietzsche is probably using the word. It's called Wissenschaft. It's more general than science. Like any of these methods of inquiry, like it includes science, but it also includes the humanities and philosophies. So I
Uh-huh.
think Nietzsche's here is talking about science in that broad sense, not just like doing experiments. Just to
Right.
clarify, in English, maybe we make
Okay.
colloquial distinction. We use like when you ask like how is ethics a science? Well, in English, there's not a good distinction. I mean, you just have to know they're different words, but in German, they're actually completely different words for
Right.
like the science of like experiments versus science as in like broad inquiry.
Okay, that's interesting. I can see. Okay. It's easy to forget. Hey, it was translated from German. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. So we got up to.
Uh,
Oh, okay, we did pass. We've gone through that. The science being able. Oh, I think we did get up to this, right? Science being
yeah.
able to dig successfully in the shaft forever. Yeah, makes sense
Yeah.
because you mentioned the Wiesen shaft. Okay. Um, how little does this resemble a product of the imagination? For if it were such, there should be some place where the illusion and reality can be defined. I'm just trying to see what he's talking about. What do you know what he meant by this? There should be some place where the illusion and reality can be
No,
defined.
I
Okay.
have a hard time understanding that one.
Okay, cool. Cool. Uh, Against this, the following must be said. This is what you highlighted, so it's going to be more relevant. If each of us had a different kind of sense perception, if we could only perceive things now as a bird, now as a worm, now as a plant, or if one of us saw a stimulus as red, another as blue, while a third even heard the same stimulus as sound, then no one would speak of such regularity of nature. Rather, nature would be grasped only as a creation which is subjective in the highest degree. Um, what do you make of though? Like if I saw like what do you make of his understanding then of the form of sense perception? I doubt he's even think. I don't even know if he's thinking in those terms. But if we're speaking of like someone seeing red as blue and another person seeing red as red, but you're still responding in the same way consistently. Like what?
I think his wider point is just that perception is different among all individuals. That our perception is not identical. Like, I mean, you can take an example of somebody needing glasses versus somebody who doesn't. We
Right,
don't see in exactly the same way. I mean, sure, we
right.
have sense perception, but it's not the same. I think he's making a point that we each have a different way of seeing the world. He's taking it more. He's just saying your perception's not identical to everyone. So in a sense, he's saying it's subjective because it's different for everything. There's no standard or no absolute regularity of the true perception.
Okay. Although we are different and perceive differently, but we respond with the same regularity to nature. For example, the bee avoiding the spider, the human avoiding the spider, or um, you know, the man running away from a tiger and the uh, horse running away from a tiger. Like there's still that's regularity, even though things are perceived differently. And so he's
Yeah.
not he's not concerned with that. He's just simply saying, "Oh well, since we perceive things," I'm just trying to understand the
Um,
um, like why is this for him at the time at least? Because I'm coming from a different context. Like why is this so profound in the sense of um, like how why would you say it affects the regularity of nature when everyone responds to
um,
nature? What is he trying to get at?
Well, he was saying we can't speak of like a regularity, like there's a law of causality in an absolute sense that we can know it
Okay.
from outside ourselves, or that there's no regularity about the laws of nature. Like they change from moment to moment, or they're not necessarily regular at all times. They could shift and alter. Are you saying that we can't really find any regularity even with our perception?
What was he focused on when is this in terms of like, because it depends on your perspective, right? Because you could say, well, there's tons of regularity, like, um, the bee will be pushed by the wind. We'll feel the wind against our hair.
Yeah,
There's a regularity there, or, like a blind man will see the same table as a man who's not. No, will not. Colorblind man will see the same table
yeah.
as the man who's not colorblind,
I
and
think this
so
is what he
that's a.
says.
So
Well,
what is
he's
he
saying
focusing on?
we are only acquainted with the effects. Like we can't be acquainted with the thing in itself, is what he's saying. We can't
Yeah.
find
Okay.
that pure truth. We only see the effects, or we only see the effects of truth, or the
Right.
effects of the laws, not
Right.
we don't perceive some law itself.
Right.
We see
So
effects.
this is why I thought when you said to me he was making fun of Kant, I was confused because I was like, well, this to me is that argument of um, because we have senses that can see things in a certain way, then
Oh, it's a
we're not
different
able
form of
to.
argument, though.
Oh, okay, okay,
Kant was more like the fact that it's processed, we can't get a pure nominal truth. At least through
right,
perception, we couldn't
right,
get there through pure reason. It's that the is necessarily processed. Nietzsche here is just saying that it's just different for everyone. So how could we even get at a pure truth somewhat? At least
right.
we're not sensing a regularity of in nature itself. We're just sensing something different. We are acquainted with the effects all differently in different ways, and we can't find the truth because it's just different for everyone. It's not a matter because it's processed. He's
Okay,
saying more that it's different for everyone is what
okay.
Nietzsche's saying here.
I wonder if he was thinking more in terms of like culture and people and religion than say, I don't know how advanced science was back then, and I mean science in the English sense, but um,
They definitely knew
because
neurology and neurons.
oh,
Like they
okay,
knew they existed.
right, right. Because to say this though, I don't like to make the case that he's making. You miss. It's like he was focused on something specific because he obviously how would you reconcile, say, or how would he think about like, well, a blind man reacts to a table and a colorblind man reacts to the table in the same way that a man who sees full color reacts, or we react to a tiger the same way a horse might react to a tiger, with fright. Like,
Yeah.
so the effect, where the effects are different, but the effects of the thing itself that we don't have access to outside in that reality has the same, like, it has a regularity to it,
Yeah.
right? So, but
I
he's
agree with
not.
you.
I
Yeah.
know, but I'm not saying like, oh, like he's missed the point, because I think he's
Oh yeah.
obviously very intelligent. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
understand like what the context was for him coming at that was, because I obviously can't,
Okay.
I've come after reading
I
objectivist epistemology, so I've got that whole context that I'm throwing onto this.
go to the paragraph before. I'll show you. There's something he
Yeah.
mentions at the top of there, above the highlight that you did. Keep going up.
Uh, yeah.
Let's see. Above my highlight, even.
Oh,
He's
okay.
talking about correct perception in quotes. After that, though.
Here,
No,
where I am now.
after my highlight on the next that there.
Ah, correct perception. Okay. I'll read this paragraph. It is even difficult for him to admit to himself that the insect or the bird perceives an entirely different world from the one man does. and that the question of which of these perceptions of the world is more correct is quite meaningless, for this would have to be decided previously in accordance with the criterion of correct perception, which means in accordance with the criterion which is not available.
Yeah. So think of it like the bent spoon or the bent stick in water. Like, how can you say
Right.
it's the wrong perception? Like, what would it mean to say the correct way to see a stick bent in water?
Right.
Like, it doesn't make sense to say what's the correct perception. We'd have to find something outside and beyond ourselves. And so that's what we're saying, not even available. It's not
Right.
available, this measurement.
Correct perception.
So that's what he's getting at later. He's saying, oh, there's all these different ways of perceiving, and there's no correct perception in this
Right.
Kantian sense.
Right.
So he's saying, oh, therefore, really there's subjectivity to it. We're not perceiving regularity. I think you're right to say that he maybe is not appreciating what the regularity is of these reactions. Like, why might we both react the same way to a lion?
Right.
I think he's failing to take that into consideration. But going from there, at least you can see Nietzsche's criticizing the idea of like a
Right.
pure correct perception, a pure correct knowledge, as if something beyond yourself could be your standard of knowledge.
I'm trying to understand then how, like, it seems obvious to me now because I've had that pointed out, but how someone else falls into this trap of missing that point of like, oh, well, yeah, okay, the form of perception might be different, but we all react similarly. There's a regularity to nature. And so how someone this intelligent would just, I don't know,
Well,
not.
I think you could almost, he's dealing with a lot of thoughts here. And
Yeah.
plus, some of these are new to him. Like,
Yeah.
I know he gets this much better later. So I
Right.
wouldn't nitpick or worry too much about
Yeah. Okay.
his imprecision, because I will acknowledge that this is one of his earlier works and it's not as
Right.
uh, well tuned as his other ideas, but it's a
Yeah.
good
Okay.
way to discuss concepts
Okay.
as far as Nietzsche goes.
I do wonder, like, if I was, let's say I was thinking about this pre-reading objectivist epistemology and all that, would I similarly, I may similarly reason much worse than he did about the same issue. It's hard to tell.
He was like 30 when he wrote this.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Okay. So let's continue where we're at.
Yeah. The subjectivity.
Where I've lost.
We're in the next one down.
On the next page.
Or at the beginning of this page. Or we just finished the last paragraph or the last highlight.
Oh, here, this one. This thing.
Okay. We are not acquainted, blah, blah, blah. All that we actually know. The next highlight. All that we actually know. No, before. The last.
Okay, yeah, got it. Yeah, got it. All that we actually know about the laws of nature is that we ourselves bring to them time and space.
Yeah.
And therefore relationships of succession and number. What do you know what he means by we bring time and space and are known to us as the sum of the relations? That's what.
I guess he's saying that we're the ones that quantify it. It's not that reality made it that way. It's just we still brought the idea of time and space to it. Like, the laws of nature are still our creation. Like, we brought them relationships, but it's still man-made, is what he's saying. That's what I think he's saying.
Okay, so, but everything marvelous about the laws of nature, everything that quite astonishes us therein and seems to demand explanation, everything that might lead us to distrust idealism, all this is completely and solely contained within the mathematical strictness and inviolability of our representations of time and space. Um, is the relationship of being astonished to distrusting idealism? What do you know what he's getting at there? Like what everything marvelous about the laws of nature that demands explanation might lead us to distrust idealism. Are you?
I'll go further down. I don't think it makes sense until you reach the
Yeah.
end of
Okay.
the paragraph. Like at the end of the paragraph, it starts to make sense.
Okay. By the way, when you're reading through something like this and you get to a passage like this and you have no idea what he's talking about, you just tend to sometimes you'll read the rest of the paper and just
Yeah.
ignore it and take out the few things that you
Yeah.
can. Okay. All right.
Sometimes it makes sense when you get to the end. It's like, oh, I get it now. Like they finally mentioned one sentence and then it clicks. That's what happens to
Okay.
me sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep going because like I'll know in my head like that's weird. I'll keep going. Like it's weird to think why would you be astonished at ideas? I mean, I just continue from there with that in my head. But then by the time it gets to the end of the paragraph, I'm seeing that he seems to be talking about astonishment, like being astonished, like, oh, I can't believe the world works with such a regularity. Like, I can't believe this is how it is.
Right.
Like, it's amazing how the brain works or something like that. And I think he's getting at that. Well, we made it anyway. Why should we necessarily be astonished? I mean, it's like coming from our will. I mean, it would seem we're the ones who impress ourselves. It's not nature that impresses us, but ourselves that impress each other. Our explanations are impressive to ourselves. It's not that nature is not that you're explaining nature, but in a way, maybe he's thinking of it like you read a book and you're amazed how great it was. And it's more like, yeah, you're actually amazed at what you've created, not what is true out there in the world beyond yourself.
Right.
He's like, embrace what you create is kind of his attitude here.
Okay.
It is a bit weird here what he's talking about. It's hard to interpret that, but it does seem like he's going on about astonishment and conformity. Then he's like impressing ourselves is what he talks about in there too. It's a really long paragraph, so it makes sense to get lost a bit. I had to read it a couple of times.
Yeah, what you're saying, I am a bit closer to understanding. I just didn't get the relationship to forms and idealism, but
forms just being, I guess,
like
idealism
there's
with
the
a sort of like
perfect thing out
Kant.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, like idealism as in like Kant, or if he says forms, you can infer that he's talking about Plato when he says forms.
Oh yeah. So here's what you're saying, that we produce these representations in and from ourselves with the same necessity with which the spider spins.
Yeah.
So as the spider spins the web, we create these conceptual webs of explanation from metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you say like those can be amazing and astonishing, but it's not because they're things in themselves.
Right.
We've created and it amazes ourselves.
Yeah.
Like it's like the spider's like, imagine the spider admiring what he created.
The only way in which the possibility of subsequently constructing a new conceptual edifice from metaphors themselves can be explained is by the firm persistence of these original forms. That is to say, the conceptual edifice is an imitation of temporal, spatial, and numerical relationships in the domain of metaphor. That's where I was like, this time space got a bit abstract for me to go. I don't, this is a bit of a, for him to explain the consistency of the concepts. He's explaining it as a result of imitation of temporal, spatial, and numerical relationships in the. What's your thoughts on that?
I get the same feeling. Usually that's the point where I usually like, oh, I'll keep going in the reading. Like I kind of
Yeah.
No, I know it's not exactly what I'm looking to talk about. So it's
Yeah.
like okay, that's nice, Nietzsche. I'll keep going.
All right, cool. Now let's see what I wrote. Okay. Uh,
Language builds concepts.
oh, yeah. So he's talking about science. I guess, as you mentioned, science being broader than just that could include religion, right? Ethics.
Yes.
Okay. Whereas the man of action binds his life to reason and its concepts so that he will not be swept away and lost. This is what I was interested in. The
Yeah.
scientific investigator, which we now have a new understanding of, builds his hut right next to the Tower of Science so that he will be able to work on it and to find shelter for himself beneath those bulwarks which presently exist. And he requires shelter, for there are frightful powers which continuously break in upon him, powers which oppose scientific truth with completely different kinds of truth, which bear on their shields the most varied sorts of emblems. This was interesting. So there's a man
Yeah.
of action who doesn't want be swept away by concepts. So I guess maybe is he talking about not when I
Um,
think man of action, I think of someone doing things, but maybe he means man of the pragmatist.
I'm not sure, but he's saying where the man of action binds his life to reason and concepts. So we know Nietzsche's been portraying that in a negative light, so he will not be swept away and lost. Like, I mean, he just does stuff, I guess. It's not
Yeah.
reflective.
Okay.
He just kind of goes along.
Right.
He just holds on because he doesn't want to get swept away and lost. It's like the average man, I guess.
Oh, like Euthyphro,
Oh, I didn't realize that. How is it
because
like you, Fro?
because Euthyphro has bound himself to piety, but he doesn't know what piety is, and yet he's out
Oh.
taking all these actions. Like he's
Oh, yeah, then
taking
yeah.
his dad to court, and so maybe that's an
Maybe he's
example
even
of
referencing that. I wonder. I wonder. But yeah, it's
yeah.
a good point.
There might
Just
even be
like
more
that.
examples like that. But see,
Yeah.
I guess that's an example of how because I only recently read it. The context can help if you've got it.
Yeah. Yes, that's
Okay,
a good observation.
and the scientific investigator builds his hut. That's interesting metaphor.
Yeah,
Right
imagine.
next to,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I'm interested in that. Like what, and so he's like towered over by this tower of science and this nest of concepts of metaphors, and like I'm interested in why he's talking about finding shelter beneath those bulwarks. And he requires shelter, for there are frightful powers which continuously break upon him. What's the difference between, so there's the man of action who has bound himself to random concepts. And let's say he's referring to someone like Euthyphro who's taking action on the basis of those concepts. But then what's he in relation to the scientific investigator who's also afraid and works on this big edifice, um, and he requires the shelter, for there are frightful powers which continuously break upon him, powers which oppose scientific truth. What I'm not too sure of the relationship between these two
I,
men.
I take it that he's saying that at least the investigator is like reaching beyond. He's building his own tower. He's starting small. He's got to start small. He's starting on his own. So, and there's this giant tower next to him. So, in
Oh,
comparison, he has a hut. But it's dangerous to be out there. I mean, realistically speaking, you have a tiny hut next to a giant tower with more powerful people. You can't just foolishly walk out there as if the world's going to be pleasantly happy that you're doing it. There's going to be forces out there that maybe jealous forces. Like, I imagine these frightful powers, like, people are telling you, you're wrong, you're evil, you're bad, you can't think that way. That's what
yeah,
I'm imagining as everybody just fighting over how he needs to be. So, at some level, you need to acknowledge, like, even that you do need to use that tower to some extent. You kind of work with it. You don't ignore it. You don't pretend it's not there, but you can work with it in a way. And it's almost necessary because otherwise maybe you'll break down too and be tossed apart or torn apart unless you take a little, just be realistic about it.
I misread it. I get it now. So the man of action is someone who just takes concepts and starts acting on their basis without much thought, like Euthyphro. But I misunderstood. I thought he was describing someone who was like building a little hut so he could constantly work on the tower. But what you're saying is, and this makes sense now, he's not, it's not that he's working on the tower, but he's independent. He's on his own. He's built this little hut to provide shelter from the frightful powers which continuously break in upon him, and all these opposing truths which which bear shields of varied emblems. So that makes sense. He's like an independent, the scientific investigator.
Yeah.
Okay. He's
it's
like
a
the
new way of doing
Socrates.
science. Or even a new way of doing science. Like he's not also, the scientist is probably not forgetting the origin of metaphors and all that.
Right.
We think about it.
Yeah, like Socrates. So this is like
sure.
Euthyphro versus Socrates.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is where it actually starts getting into art, obviously. The drive for the formation of metaphors is the fundamental human drive. Okay, that's the start. This drive is not truly vanquished and scarcely subdued by the fact that the regular new rigid world. Okay, so he's saying there's a drive for metaphors, and the drive is not subdued by our creation of these arbitrary creations of these concepts.
Yeah, no rigid concepts binding it. It's still free.
And he's saying this drive finds its realm. Somehow this drive is expressed through myth and art.
Yes.
Yeah. And the drive continually confuses the conceptual categories and brings cells forward. New transferences, metaphors, I don't know what that is, metonymies. It continually manifests an ardent desire to refashion the world which presents itself to waking man so that it will be as colorful, irregular, lacking in results and coherence, charming and eternally new as the world of dreams. Okay, that's interesting.
So Nietzsche, weirdly enough, is saying that like insanity or even absurdity is what that drive would consist of, that it's not trying to make sense or be fit these neat categories, but this constantly evolving and shifting desire and constantly shifting sort of attitude.
Right. And then in relation to art, that would just mean creating works of art that confuse concepts, meaning they make you question your concepts. Is that me just applying my own context onto him?
I think that's part either you applying your context. I mean, I think Nietzsche is particular saying that he's admiring a more chaotic kind of, it's not as well defined as you might think of. Yeah, questioning concepts would be part of that, but he goes into the Greek myths too. Like there's some kind of weirdness and strangeness to Greek myths that aren't really very logical or sensible. It's just like, yeah, you can see in the next the rest of the paragraph, he'll explain that better.
Right. It does speak here about, if you went to sleep every night and your dreams were consistent, you wouldn't call them dreams. Like if you're a CEO, if you went to bed every night and you woke up as you went to bed and you dreamed of being a CEO for 12 hours, and that life would continue with consistency and with its own rules. And then you'd wake up and have your other life. It would be like, in your other life, you were a workman. I think he gave an example like that. It would be just as good as if you're a CEO in real life, if it had the consistency, but the dreams don't have the consistency, and that's how we tell their dreams. There was something like that.
Yeah, it was saying there's a weirdness and even non-coherence within dreams.
Right.
It's about like when a god takes the shape of a bull and drag away a maiden. Like that's a makes sense in Greek myth. Like, oh, makes sense is the wrong way to put it. There's so many bizarre things in Greek myth that don't really follow rhyme or reason. It's just like a passion or something. It's very bizarre.
Yeah. Okay, so in fact, because of the way that myth takes it for granted that miracles are always happening, the waking life of a mythically inspired people, the ancient Greeks, for instance, more closely resembles a dream than it does the waking world of a scientifically disenchanted thinker. What, uh, what does he mean by that?
I guess just the rational man that he was criticizing earlier, that we might just be disenchanted or not find the meaning anymore. It sounds like somebody that's lacking a passion or deep emotion about the waking world.
Right.
I mean, it's just kind of boring, isn't it, in a way? Like Nietzsche seems excited describing that type of chaos of a dream, but he's saying, "Oh, this other world's kind of bland."
So life should be like a dream. It should be fun and like
Yes.
unstable, and you can start floating into like you'll just start floating,
Yeah,
things like
but
that.
he sees it as profoundly creative. That
Right.
that's you're living life creatively at that point,
Right.
is what Nietzsche says.
Right. Okay. As opposed to a humdrum routine
Yes.
of someone caught in a web. What is it? The Tower of Concepts or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
The man of action.
Right. Hmm. Yeah. I guess this is why it would be helpful to know, like how he lived and what
Yeah.
people around him thought. Like, did he, I remember hearing something like he would go for long walks a lot of the time. So uh, it's not like he worked an
And
office job.
he had a lot of he was very sick. Like he had a lot of migraines and
Right.
digestive problems and trouble seeing. So in a way, maybe the dream world imagination is probably how he made it through the day sometimes. He can't really go out always, so
That
he
makes
uses
sense.
imagination and thinking a lot. So I could see the value in this creativity he speaks of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's helpful to know that. Uh, um, okay, let's.
Pretty sure that's a typo. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a typo. It was a weird typo.
So long, but let's just see. So to remind myself what this passage is about. A man has an invincible inclination to allow himself. Okay, cool. As it were, enchanted with happiness. Okay, so he's happy to be deceived sometimes. So as long as it is able to deceive without injuring, that master of deception, the intellect, is free. It is released from its former slavery and celebrates its Saturnalia. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe a
It's
Roman
like
reference or something.
a grand feast and celebration.
Oh, okay. It is never more luxuriant, richer, prouder, more clever, more daring. With creative pleasures, it throws metaphors into confusion and displaces the boundary stones of abstraction so that, for example, it designates the stream as the moving path which carries man where he would otherwise walk. So life becomes exciting. Like if you're creative with your imagination, what is just a path can become a um, a stream that, a boring walk becomes a stream.
Yeah.
Okay. That immense framework of planking concepts to which the needy man clings his whole life long in order to preserve himself is nothing but a scaffolding and toy for the most audacious feats of the liberated intellect. And when it smashes this, I do like the way he writes. And when it smashes this framework to pieces, throws it into confusion and puts it back together in an ironic fashion, pairing the most alien things and separating the closest, it is demonstrating that it has no need of these makeshifts of indigence, and that it will now be guided by intuitions rather than by concepts.
Yeah.
So he's looking for a kind of, to me, this is a, I guess, a kind of creative power that he sees, that he can just sweep away all these concepts and create new concepts by the power of imagination, and that what becomes a boring walk becomes a flowing stream. And yeah, I wonder if like some of it is the questioning of, I don't know, if there are like certain concepts in religion that like forbid pleasure, and then you're like, well, does that, I'll create my own metaphor of what pleasure is and
Yeah,
then act on that. I wonder if he's getting at some of that.
I think so. I mean, at least he realizes that later. I don't know if
Right.
he realized that when he wrote this, but I think he
Okay.
does realize that a
Yeah.
few books in from here. He realizes like that's what he's saying.
And,
Like he gets at his ideas better.
and my interpretation of this part here specifically, and I want to hear what you think, is that he's talking about someone who's worked at becoming creative so that he can take this weak little scaffolding of the average man and smash it to bits and turn it into something ironic made of alien things. Like he's almost talking about the cultivation of a kind of intellect or creativity, not intellect.
Yes.
Because is that what,
Yeah.
how
I
you,
would say he wants to cultivate a creative passion in
yeah.
individuals.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting contrast with Rand because I mean she does acknowledge the creative power and innovation of individuals. And
Yeah.
I think even she acknowledges that concepts are creations. The main difference with her is that she does argue that reason is essential to this process, that it
Right.
doesn't need to make us rigid. It doesn't need to make us stuck. It
Right.
actually what it is that we've assumed. I mean,
Sorry, you
maybe,
got cut off. It doesn't need to make us stuck and then something that we've assumed.
yeah, we can expand on what question our assumptions. That if you approach reason correctly, you'll question these assumptions that Nietzsche's trying to break away. And Rand's a
Okay.
better way. Like in a way, I see like Rand's makes an argument that yes, concepts do have an objective basis, but if there's still things we create, I mean, the concepts we don't find out there, like we build them. And I think that's something Rand could acknowledge too, even though they disagree that all concepts are metaphors. They at least agree that
Right.
they're creations.
Right.
And that can be something. Creation is important.
Right.
Creation is what we do, and we have to ourselves decide how to create concepts. Somebody can't do it for us. And if we did,
Right.
then we're just like those needy men that cling to what's been there already. Like the herd mentality is like, don't cling to those ideas. Just develop your ideas and build on them. Don't just
Right.
stick with what you had.
Right. You know, you just reminded me of, I guess what he, so part of what he must be getting at is more his, because religion was obviously stronger and had more of an influence then. So all those religious concepts. But then it makes me think of this. I remember ages ago watching this video of Jordan Peterson saying like tradition is there for a good reason. Like you don't want to go wandering out into the woods alone, or you're going to fall
Yeah.
into a big, big, deep hole or something like
Yeah.
that. And so I guess it's that, right? Like that feeling of, yeah, if there are all these accepted uh moral, social moral concepts, I guess people don't always think of them as moral, but like, you know, you should prepare for this in your life, and you should get married, and you should do this or that, or whatever it is, that it's not necessarily bad, but like there are things that there's a certain pathway that people are often told they're supposed to follow. And if you disconnect from that completely, it is kind of scary because you are on your own, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what it seems like, that's what he's getting at.
Yeah. Like you kind of need like a tether. Even if you're out there exploring, you need a tether lest you get lost and never come back. Get lost in the abyss or something. At least you have a way home.
Yes. Yeah, I think you definitely need a tether. Although with him, I imagine it's like he's striving for this creative power. He wants this. I can see that it's the sense of like wanting to create, but it would be hard. Like, what will you be tethered to? It's In either cases, and I guess also the rigidity let's say, Rand makes sense, because what were the options? Either intrinsicism or
Yeah.
subjectivism, right?
Yeah. For the most part, yeah.
Yeah. And then
And
you're
I mean, I
taking
guess
it.
it would say there's people grasping at what Rand was getting at, that they weren't there yet. They saw a difference between complete subjectivity and
Right.
complete intrinsicism.
Yeah. Right. So, okay. So there were people trying to cross the two, but
I think
um,
so.
just getting close, but not grasping at it, not making
Yeah,
it.
that's why Nietzsche said he described himself as dynamite. He's blowing up concepts, and he's not necessarily creating new ones for you, but he's annihilating these old ones that are
All
stupid or
right.
useless, or the
Right.
thing in itself. They'll blow it up, and what do you have now? It's gone. What do you replace it with?
I've heard him described as like the philosopher with the hammer or something like that.
He self-described, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
like
Self-described.
philosophizing with a hammer.
Yeah, yeah, to destroy concepts. But that's like Socrates, right? Isn't that what Socrates does?
Well, he's more passive, more like questioning. Hammer
Yeah.
sounds a lot more aggressive.
And yeah, yeah, you're right. Okay. Right. Hmm.
You can imagine like Thor slamming down with his hammer versus Socrates asking like just asking you infinite questions.
And then he's also passive in that he stayed to be put to death in his trap.
Yeah, he was described as a gnat often.
A
Socrates,
what?
a gnat,
What's and
a
that is
tiny,
like a
tiny fly,
okay.
annoying tiny fly.
Ah,
Or at least
all
in
right.
the play, The Clouds, he was made fun of in that play. There's a comedy. It made
Oh,
fun of him.
really? I didn't know. And he was described. That kind of makes sense. He is a bit of a gnat, whereas I can see how that Nietzsche
Yeah,
self-described himself as having a hammer. Um, all right, let's keep going. What's this? Oh, so
yeah,
he's talking about the rational and the intuitive man.
yeah,
Overjoyed hero counting as only that life which has been disguised as illusion and beauty. Let me just see. Disguise. He's counting as real only that life which has been disguised as illusion and beauty. Do you know what he was referring to? So he's
he's
talking about the
talking.
overjoyed hero, I think the intuitive man. There's a rational man and an intuitive man.
Yeah,
That's a distinction he makes.
yeah,
And then one is in fear of intuition, the other with scorn for abstraction.
yeah. So he embraces those things he knows that are illusions, that he
Right.
knows aren't the truth.
Okay. Which has been disguised an illusion and beauty. Okay. Um, what do you know why he goes to intuition? Like, why does he lean towards? Because he's talking about intellect as a method of deception and creating the content. Oh, okay. So maybe he thinks because they're metaphors, their intuition is what is actually responsible for creating the concept. Is
I
that what he?
think so. I'm
Okay.
not sure. That would make most sense.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if some of that's coming from influence of Roman thinkers. I'm not
Okay.
sure if they use the word intuition much. I think they
Yeah.
did, but I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, he's like, this is the other way of thinking. Like, use your intuition. It's like, what strikes you, what inspires you, what makes you think quickly.
Right. Rather than what that abstraction tells you to do, even
Yeah,
if you don't like doing it and don't feel good doing it.
yeah,
Whenever, as was perhaps the case in ancient Greece, the intuitive man handles his weapons more authoritatively and victoriously than his opponent, then under favorable circumstances, a culture can take shape and art's mastery over life can be established. All the manifestations of such a life will be accompanied by this dissimulation, this disavowal of indigence, this glitter of metaphorical intuitions. And then he says, Neither the house, nor the gate, nor the clothes, nor the clay jugs give evidence of having been invented because of a pressing need. It seems as if they were all intended to express an exalted happiness, an Olympian cloudlessness, as it were, playing with seriousness. So this is interesting. I guess this ties into his emphasis on intuition and creativity. So he's tying up intuition and creativity, and he's saying that all of these things like clothes or clay jugs were not seen as needs until they were created.
Or maybe even more that they weren't made because they were needs. It's just because they wanted them.
Right,
There's no reason. They just felt like it. It was
right,
their will.
right. And when he's saying the intuitive man handles his weapons more authoritatively and victoriously than his opponent. So, okay, he's saying, so the intuitive man has won over the culture. And so then all these creations start taking place.
Yes. Like you're living life as according to your will rather than what's been dictated from the outside
Right,
or with the existing
right,
structures. It's not
right,
giving like a commandment from the top atop the tower or something. You
right,
can do what you want.
right. I wonder if in his mind was the contrast between, say, medieval Christianity. I don't know how much knowledge they had of that, and the life under medieval Christianity and um, the Renaissance, and then also obviously Greek and Roman times. And so he contrasted those, and he saw the root of them as intuition and
Yes.
whatever the result of paganism was, of just doing what you feel like,
Yeah.
and that resulted in the creation of all these things.
Yeah. He at this point in his life, the Greeks were who he most respected,
Right.
precisely because of this like most intuitive way of being. The way they made art was dreamlike and intuitive.
It wasn't like it was. So when he was writing, it was very structured and
Or at least he wrote about contrasting ways the Greeks wrote, but the ancient Greeks wrote in a particularly extravagant way.
right. Okay.
It was unique to them.
And so he liked the ancient Greeks then, but you're saying later maybe he didn't, or what? Because when he
He grew
wrote
to
this,
like the Romans more. It's hard to say.
okay,
He respected the Romans more over time.
got it. The man who is guided by concepts and abstractions only succeeds by such means in warding off misfortune without ever gaining any happiness for himself from these abstractions. And while he aims for the greatest possible freedom from pain, the intuitive man, standing in the midst of a culture, already reaps from his intuition a harvest of continually inflowing illumination, cheer, and redemption, in addition to attaining defense against the misfortune. I guess it would be good to know who he's thinking of when he thinks, like, he's obviously thinking of, maybe someone religious or something, and then he's comparing it to someone else he sees who's happy. But without those references, it's hard to really,
Yeah.
because it just remains this passage. And
He makes a
obviously
lot
today
of
we're way
reference.
more free. So
Yeah.
it's harder to relate unless we know what he has in mind when he's got this. Sorry, you were
Yes.
saying?
I was thinking how, um, yeah, he seems to make a lot of references. Sometimes even when you don't realize he's making a reference. Like I've noticed that times, like I look something up and it's like, wow, that's much deeper than I thought. Like he's
Okay.
referencing a thing that if you knew about it, then it all makes sense. Like
Right.
Lessing's son, like I had
Right.
no idea what that was, but then I looked
Right.
it up. It's like, wow, that's an interesting reference. It's kind of
Yeah.
obscure, but he would know what it was.
Right.
Or like you said, Euphophro.
Yeah.
I mean, you're probably right. I didn't read that, so I would have noticed, but I wouldn't be surprised. That's literally what he's referencing.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. We will